This is VOA Africa.
Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Friday, July 3rd. This is Africa 54. Due to the global outbreak of COVID-19, Voice of America is taking every necessary precaution to safeguard its employees. So our broadcast will look a little different today and in the near future as we, out of an abundance of caution, reduce our staffing at VOA headquarters here in Washington. We're working to help keep you informed about what's going on, and we appreciate you staying with us on Africa 54. The murder of a prominent Oromo singer Hakalu Hundessa is sparking protests in the Ethiopian capital. The Oromia regional authorities say at least 50 people have been killed in the violence. For the latest, here's VOA Salem Solomon.
As anger boils over among Ethiopia's Oromo population following the death of a revered singer, observers say swift action and transparency by the government are necessary. Hachalu Hundessa was shot in Addis Ababa on June 29. Police quickly apprehended suspects, but few details have been released, fueling suspicion and sparking a violent backlash. Henok Gabisa, a professor of practice at Washington and Lee University School of Law, said Hachalu's music was the soundtrack of the Oromo Revolution. His death came after an appearance on the Oromia Media Network, where he criticized Ethiopia's leadership.
Hachalu is way more than a musician. I mean, he's way more than an artist. Hachalu is an activist artist who always stood his ground, who spoke truth to power way long time ago when it was difficult to do.
The murder comes at a time when tensions are already high amid restrictions relating to COVID-19 and the postponement of parliamentary elections formerly scheduled for August. In a national address, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed sought to quell tensions. More than being a national figure, he was a close friend. The sorrow is very deep, he said. But the wish of our enemies is for us not to reach our goals so that the Oromo people can't live with other ethnicities and we would paint each other with blood. They want us to trip on the journey we have started. This attempt has been tried repeatedly, he added. Observers warn that a slow or heavy-handed government response risks a repeat of past protests among the Oromo ethnic group that led to hundreds of deaths. In November 2019 alone, 86 people were killed in protests following allegations that security forces were plotting to attack Jawar Mohammed, an activist and co-founder of Oromia Media Network. Letitia Bader is the Human Rights Watch Horn of Africa director.
And so it's absolutely key that the Ethiopian authorities respond to this by acting urgently to reduce tensions and to ensure that security forces do not make what could be a combustible situation worse. The government needs to order security forces not to use excessive force or to carry out arbitrary arrests, including against protesters, as they've often done in the past.
As during past periods of unrest, Ethiopia's government-controlled telephone and internet provider, Ethio Telecom, shut off internet access. Bader said this lack of access to information adds to the confusion.
It's absolutely key for the government to make sure that as soon as possible it is providing accurate, timely information to the public on what they're doing to investigate killing, but also how they are responding to what could be a very tense situation.
Protesters have been further angered this week as news spread that Jawar Mohammed was arrested and the domestic operations of his television network were shut down. A total of 35 people have been arrested in Addis Ababa, including Oromo leader Baqqala Garba. Merera Guddina, chair of the Oromo Federalist Congress and opposition party, said the events show the urgent need for reform. He called for a commission with representatives from all sectors of society to oversee the way political opponents and protests are treated in Ethiopia.
We want some sort of more inclusive commission that can oversee some of the way the government is conducting its business. The government is not properly functioning, so that's our worry.
The opposition is also demanding more transparency and accountability from the government. Salam Solomon, VOA News, Washington.
Kenya's poorest region is buckling under the strain of a new generation of locusts that is destroying crops and threatens to spread to neighboring countries imminently. Nazanin Moshiri of Reuters reports.
It's planting season in Kenya's Turkana region. But instead of growing, farmers like Victor Juma are seeing their crops destroyed by a new swarm of locusts.
In the entire farm, if you go around, the farmers go around, or anyone can go around, you'll find that almost all the tomatoes have been destroyed in this shape.
The number of locusts in East Africa exploded in late 2019, exacerbated by unusual weather patterns that have been amplified by climate change. But this generation has hatched in Kenya's poorest region, and the young locusts are eating everything in sight.
They destroy our maize, poultry, so it gives us a hard time.
Turkana is a vast, dry scrubland in northwest Kenya that borders Uganda, South Sudan and Ethiopia. Daniel Kirura, head of the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization in Turkana, where 20 million people were already struggling for food, says the locusts are destabilizing an already bad situation. But he also warns that within a week, wings could mature, meaning they'll be able to travel up to 80 miles a day.
Our prayer is that we try to arrest that because they can go and cause problems in other countries and other regions. So our wish is to control them before they leave Turkana County.
He says teams are working frantically to spray the locusts with insecticide before they become airborne, while the farmers use tin drums to scare the locusts away from their dwindling crops.
That was Nazanin Moshiri of Reuters reporting. Now to some good news in the fight against the coronavirus. The drug dexamethasone, a steroid, is showing to be effective in treating severe or critical COVID-19 patients. The drug is to be made for up to 4.5 million people in low and middle-income countries, according to the United Nations agencies. The UN's Children's Fund is negotiating the purchase under the deal led by the international non-profit United and Welcome, a British-based charity, as part of the World Health Organization's plan to accelerate access to therapeutics, according to a joint statement released on Friday. Philippe Donaton, acting executive director of United, says, quote, "With this advanced purchase, we aim to ensure equitable access for low and middle income countries for treatment of COVID-19 with the life-saving dexamethasone and avoid shortages resulting from high levels of demand from other parts of the world." Meanwhile, the World Health Organization says it does not think there are numerous undetected coronavirus infections spreading across Africa, with people dying unreported. Africa is reporting over 416,000 COVID-19 infections with over 10,000 deaths, but nearly 200,000 people have recovered, according to a Reuters count based on government statistics and WHO data. U.S. lawmaker Karen Bass of California discusses the U.S. response to the global pandemic and what has to be done to combat the virus. She also cautions leaders not to use the spread of the coronavirus as an excuse to clamp down on civil societies. Here again is VOA Salam Solomon in the final part of three-part conversation with U.S. Congresswoman Karen Bass.
It would be remiss of me not to mention the pandemic and your role in the subcommittee on Africa, global health, human rights, international organizations. Do you think the U.S. is doing enough to help African countries during the global COVID-19 pandemic?
No, I mean, I have to start and say I don't think the U.S. government is doing enough to help people in the U.S. 125,000 people have died in the last 4 months. Having said that, if we're not helping people here at home, of course we're not helping people in Africa, and our first move was to cut funding to the World Health Organization and to pull ourselves out. So that's the exact opposite of what we need to be doing now.
Any message you have for African leaders who might be listening, watching, and looking at the U.S.?
Yes. Number one, I hope that the situation in Africa, I know it's getting a little worse, but it doesn't seem to be exploding. I hope that stays. I would like to be kept informed of it. But the only thing that I would say, and I know the African countries know how to do this very well, so they don't need me to tell them, but the public safe protocols, the public safe recommendations, public health recommendations. And I think reaching out to us in Congress to let us know how we can be helpful to their countries.
Any note on human rights issues as well? While we're at
Yes, I mean, being helpful to how we can be helpful to their countries. But I think that in the United States and throughout Africa, we need to make sure that the pandemic doesn't become an excuse to clamp down on free speech and other human rights issues. Change your constitution because there's a pandemic. None of that should happen.
That was VOA Salem Solomon speaking to U.S. Representative Karen Bass. With a spike in America's coronavirus infections and top Republicans joining Democrats in urging Americans to wear a mask to slow the pandemic, President Donald Trump, who has opposed wearing one in public, may be shifting his tone. White House correspondent Patsy Widakuswara has this story.
You all alone now, last man. You are Lone Ranger.
Yes, Tano, I am a Lone Ranger.
This American Western character invoked by President Donald Trump this week. After long resisting calls to wear a face mask in public, Trump now says he would wear one in certain situations, adding it makes him look like the Lone Ranger. On Thursday, he backed efforts by governors and local officials to get people back to the basics when it comes to containing the virus.
That includes face coverings, social distancing, testing, and personal hygiene. Wash your hands.
Earlier this month, Trump said some Americans wear masks to signal disapproval of him. Trump has not mandated people to wear face coverings, but his comment this week may reflect a small shift in tone.
One of the things I think we can expect from the president is that he will do what he often attempts to do rhetorically, which is play both sides just enough to give himself some wiggle room. I'm not sure, though, with the staying power of the narrative of the pandemic, if that is going to work in this particular instance.
The U.S. reported more than 52,000 new coronavirus cases on Wednesday, the largest single-day total since the start of the pandemic. With an 80% increase of new cases in the past 2 weeks, more Republican lawmakers have joined Democrats in urging Americans to wear masks.
It's the single most important thing you can do, not only to protect yourself, but protect others until we get a vaccine. Put on the mask. It's not complicated.
Unlike in some countries where masks are simply a health issue, Americans are politically divided. According to the latest Pew research, 76% of Democrats say they wear a mask in public compared to 53% of Republicans. Presumptive Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden blames the president for this divide.
The president gives no direction, and he pits us against one another. We can't continue like this. Half recovering and half getting worse. We can't continue. Half wearing masks and half rejecting science.
Vice President Mike Pence has recently started wearing masks in public and encouraging their use. And White House officials continue to insist that Americans follow their local directives and make the best decision for their safety. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News, Washington.
We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, Zimbabwe's hit maker Ja Preza brings us good, clean fun with his latest music video. We'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Lynn Ormoudou, your VOA Health correspondent. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the World Health Organization says there are currently no drugs licensed for the treatment or prevention of COVID-19, and there is no proof that hydroxychloroquine or any other drug can cure or prevent coronavirus. The misuse of hydroxychloroquine can cause serious side effects, illness, and even lead to death. For more information on COVID-19, visit who.int or contact your local or national health authorities.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Joe Biden, the U.S. Democratic Party's presumptive presidential nominee, is rebuking President Donald Trump for his handling of allegations the Russians paid bounties to kill American soldiers. It's a reflection of Biden's long-standing criticism of Trump's national security and foreign policies. But as VOA's Brian Padden reports, the two men aren't actually all that far apart on many key issues.
Joe Biden slammed President Trump on Tuesday for what Biden sees as the president's passive response to intelligence reports the Russians paid Taliban fighters to kill American soldiers. Trump claims he was not briefed and that the reports were not credible.
So the idea that somehow he didn't know or isn't being briefed, it is a dereliction of duty if that's the case. And if he was briefed and nothing was done about this, that's a dereliction of duty.
Biden, who was President Barack Obama's vice president, has been a fierce critic of what Biden calls Trump's haphazard and dangerous foreign policy. In January, he said Trump put the U.S. on the brink of war after a U.S. airstrike killed a top Iranian general in retaliation for deadly Iranian-backed attacks on Americans in Iraq.
The failure to consult with our allies or Congress and the reckless disregard for the consequences that would surely follow was, in my view, dangerously incompetent.
However, tensions eased after Iran retaliated with a non-lethal missile attack against a U.S. military base in Iraq. In contrast to Trump's reliance on unilateral action to confront U.S. security threats, Biden promises to work closely with Democratic allies and prioritize negotiation over confrontation. Biden is closer to Trump's position on ending U.S. military involvement in Afghanistan and Syria, continuing negotiations with North Korea to end its nuclear program, and confronting China's suppression of human rights in Hong Kong. But critics question how effective Biden can be in leading an international response with the left wing of the Democratic Party opposed to military interventions. Add to that pressing domestic challenges Biden would face in the coronavirus pandemic, growing unemployment, and racial injustice protests at home.
He's got a huge and very expensive agenda that he's already signed up to. So the likelihood of a sort of traditional revival of American assertive leadership and particularly intervention in crises, I'm a little bit skeptical of.
Biden would likely rejoin the Iran nuclear deal negotiated by the Obama administration that Trump pulled out of, arguing the accord did not limit ballistic missile development and support for Iranian-backed militias. Biden would recommit the U.S. to the Paris Climate Accord signed by nearly 200 countries, cutting greenhouse gas emissions from cars and factories to counter global warming. But Biden said he would not rejoin the Obama-era Trans-Pacific Partnership Free Trade Pact that Trump rejected until stronger protections for labor and American jobs are added. Brian Padden, VOA News, Washington.
Here in Washington, D.C., several weeks of heated demonstrations for racial justice and equality left behind signs, posters, and other artwork of value to historians. The National Museum of African American History and Culture and several other Smithsonian institutions are trying to collect and preserve these materials. VOA's Julie Tabo reports.
They protested day after day because of the death of George Floyd, a black man who died in late May after being in police custody in the state of Minnesota. Demonstrators attached hundreds of posters and artwork to a temporary fence near the White House to express themselves.
Pain and struggle oftentimes inspires some of the best art, and all these people are putting their
their thoughts, emotions, their recognition of this time in these little pieces, these little posters.
As word got out that the fence would be taken down, city workers and volunteers swooped in to gather up the items left behind and move them to a wall across the street for safekeeping.
When we first approached, we were surprised that we didn't see any signs on the fence as we did on television. And as we were further down, we could see that all of the signs were still here and preserved. And we're thankful for that because we still have the opportunity to see it.
The Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington has created a rapid response collecting team. Its goal? To document the social protests held across the country and around the world, sparked by Floyd's death and other alleged cases of police brutality, says curator Aaron Bryant.
Behind those artifacts are real voices, real lived experiences, and a humanity that we can all connect to.
No justice, no peace.
The museum's hope is to use this opportunity to have an honest dialogue about race.
Right now, in this very transformative period in our nation's history, we should require, and I would say demand, honest conversations around the unvarnished truth. It's the only way that we can progress as a collective humanity.
I hope to see this collage as a section in the Smithsonian National African American Museum someday.
Literally signs of the time as keepsakes of history. Julie Tabo, VOA News.
It's time now for the latest in African entertainment, and here's the latest music video from Zimbabwean hit maker Ja Preza. He pokes good, clean fun at the relationships between husbands and their in-laws in Africa. The video has reached 2 million views in just 39 days. Here is Mukosha.
uchapura nyemba uchadzura nzungudziya ende baba vati vanoda madhorofia wotomhanya musango mukwazvo pane yandibira pombi yemvura kana zondo rangu randanga ndapfura vanhu vese vatifundisai kwazvo pakati pevanhu vese varipo iyandi watigarira kumhepo zvakungonzi bvunzai kwazvo ndiri kunzwa kuda kurova munhu ndiri kunzwa kuda kubata munhu rega ndimbokurova mukwazvo zvandapfuura nekutama ingana kubatira ikwaya ndikambora mugogo wangu uchi usina masana zvandapfuura nekutama ingana kubatira ikwaya ndikambora mugogo wangu uchi usina masana sheri yacho sheriyo yamakandipa imenye mwana inyambe zvikare mandoita ndarudza malema sheri yacho sheriyo yamakandipa imenye mwana inyambe zvikare mandoita ndarudza malema kwasha chongwero muchamanya naro kusvikira maribata madzimbo yavoda sagari makaka changamire vati vanoda hari mukwasha zino rakaora muchando rinobanda ndina mari yekudzurisa kane mukwasha vakatemwa nyora kare neimwe ng'anga vati zvara vakunaro vanodzikaka tungamira mumbeti rine mukwasha azambeni fambane ndima azambeni fambane ndima tibatire foro tirime mkwa azambeni fambane ndima azambeni fambane ndima azambeni fambane ndima kutagura dandanda kuti mkwa azambeni fambane ndima azambeni fambane ndima azambeni fambane ndima zvandavura nekutama inganda kubatira ikwaya ndikamora mgogo wangu usina masana zvandavura nekutama inganda kubatira ikwaya ndikamora mgogo wangu usina masana sheriyo yamakandipa imenya yemwana nyangwe zvikare mandoita narutsa malema sheriyo yamakandipa imenya yemwana nyangwe zvikare mandoita narutsa malema.
That was the latest hot video from Zimbabwe hitmaker Ja Praiser. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, have a great weekend.